Hello, everyone, and happy National Science Week. Welcome to the Indigenous Science Experience webinar session using ancient knowledge for environmental sustainability, healthcare, and cultural revitalisation. My name is Joanne Jamie, and I'm a chemistry academic at Macquarie University, and I'm also co-director of the National Indigenous Science Education Program, or NISEP, which is the host of this event. It's my absolute pleasure to be your host of this being our first event of the Indigenous Science Experience Program for 2023 for National Science Week. This event brings together people who live and work on different lands, and I would like to pay my respects and acknowledge the land that I'm on at Macquarie University, as well as also acknowledge the custodians of all the lands involved in this event. So I'm on the land of the Wallumalgil people of Darug Nation. I would like to also extend my respects to the traditional custodians of the land on which you're all joining us. I pay my respects to elders, past, present, and all emerging leaders, and all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples with us this evening. The National Science Week webinar, as part of the Indigenous Science Experience program of face-to-face and online events, is brought to you by the National Indigenous Science Education Program of Macquarie University. And we're very grateful for the support of Inspiring Australia and grant funding from the Australian Government, which allows this all to be able to happen for our week of events. We are going to be joined this evening by the founders of two fantastic companies. We're being joined by the founders of South Coast Seaweed, Sarah and James Thomas, and the General Manager of Native Secrets, Brendan Ryan, and Peter Duggar of CSIRO, the Commonwealth Scientific Industry Research Organisation. South Coast Seaweed and Native Secrets are fully Indigenous-owned companies, and their work is absolutely inspirational, and it's an absolute pleasure to be able to have them involved in these webinars. South Coast Seaweed and Native Secrets are revitalising customary knowledge on natural resources from the land and to the sea. And they're extending on this knowledge in really innovative ways, including in the development of a range of commercial products, which we'll get to hear about, on educational work. And these are all leading to positive impacts environmentally and for healthcare and for revitalisation of culture. So Sarah and James of South Coast Seaweed are the founders of that company, and Phil and Cherry Thompson, and Uncle Peter Peckham are the co-founders of Native Secrets. And their companies and they have been recognised for outstanding achievements through a whole host of awards and other accolades. It seems every time I go to the social media, I see yet another award that both of those companies and the individuals have received. So tonight you're going to hear about the important work that Native Secrets and South Coast Seaweed do. You're going to learn of some specific examples of customarily used natural resources and what they have developed with them. And in doing so, I hope you get to really appreciate the rich knowledge of Australia's First Nations peoples, the first scientists. You will also hear about the partnerships that they've had with CSIRO and academic scientists that are providing rewarding learning experiences for all of us and some great community outcomes. If you have any questions throughout this webinar, please place them in the Q&A panel that's located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. I will ask our guest presenters at the end of the session as many questions as possible, but we apologise in advance if we can't get through all of them. We also want to note that our speakers are coming from places such as South Coast of New South Wales, Dubbo and Melbourne, and we ask you to be patient if we have any network issues. And in fact, we have to acknowledge up front, there are a few little network issues. So one of our speakers, you'll get to hear more than actually see. But first, we want you to hear and see from Phil Thompson and Uncle Peter Peckham in a beautiful video about Native Secrets.
I'm Phil Thompson. I'm a Bidjara Karakara man from Central Queensland. I'm the co-founder of Native Secrets.
Peter Peckham, Senior Wiradjuri Elder, and my role is cultural advisor.
And we started Native Secrets because we found there was a disconnect between our communities, and we wanted our communities to start talking to each other again. And the best way we thought we could get people talking again was around our bush foods and our medicinal plants. Over many millennia, our people have survived this country. It's one of the harshest climates in the world. And somehow we've survived over 65,000 years. Our people were so in tune with the environment, we learned all the medicinal plants, all the bush tuckers to help us through that survival period. The risk we have right now is ensuring that we capture all that information from our old people, particularly from this man standing right next to me. He's one of the last knowledge holders of this information. And we feel it's part of our responsibility to capture those stories and knowledge to share with the rest of the world. Our dream is to utilise this knowledge to produce complementary medicines that benefit people around the world, and at the same time, everyone's starting to share our story of our 65,000 years history. Apologies we can't make it there tonight. We wish we could have been there, but we've left you in great hands. Brendan Ryan, he's a scientist. He represents our brand. We're very fortunate to have Brendan in the team. He talks a bit funny. Most of the time we can't understand what he says, but we love him. He's going to represent us, and we'll have a good night. Good day. Good night. Thank you.
That was such a wonderful introduction to Native Secrets, and particularly a nice segue into hearing from Brendan as the General Manager of Native Secrets. As was said, he does speak a little differently, but also, unfortunately, he's having some network issues as well. So you're going to hear Brendan, but maybe not see his face quite so much. So Brendan, we'd love to hear a bit more about Native Secrets from you, or maybe you can tell us where you are coming from this evening as well.
Thank you, Joanne. And yes, as Phil did imply, I am originally from New Zealand, so I do have a language warning. I will be killing a few vowels in the course of this conversation. And as Peter will talk about later, you are quite privileged not to see my face. So it's all good. I'm speaking to you from a hotel room in Dubbo on Wiradjuri country, where Native Secrets is based. So apologies for the network connection. It's a little bit reliable. So if I drop out, I'm going to hand everything over to Peter, who's going to make up a lot of stories. Okay. A bit of the background. The footage you saw before was Phil on the land that we look after out here in Dubbo, and it's a mine site. And Phil was engaged to do the biodiversity management of that site. And as part of that biodiversity management, we had to clear out some invasive species of trees, one of those being white cypress pine. So white cypress is a native species, but we believe it was traditionally managed via cultural burns, which would separate out. When it is not managed, it clumps, and it basically all grows up, spindly little trees that block out the sun, kill all the grass. The white cypress has insecticidal properties, so it actually means that the insects don't populate the trees, and the ants and the termites and the bugs and the beetles and that do not populate area where white cypress lives, which means the birds don't live there. It blocks out the sun, so the grasses don't grow there. So it actually breaks down the ecosystem quite significantly. Part of Phil's job when he took over the site was actually to thin it and try and restore the land that we were on. And we were told that it was originally koala habitat. But if you looked at the site, you go, no, there's no chance it was koala habitat. There were very few eucalypts. There was very few of anything except white cypress pine. So that was Phil's first job. On the other side, he used to have a labour hire company, and he was providing Indigenous workforce into different businesses. And he was supplying workers to a eucalyptus oil company. And one day he just couldn't find any workers. So he had to go do some work himself, which is a surprise for Phil. He'll tell you otherwise. But he was made to go and do some work for once. And he actually loved what they were doing with the eucalyptus oil and sort of thought, well, could I actually apply that to the white cypress? So him and Uncle Pete got together and spent many weeks and months and years basically buggerizing around achieving nothing, all the while lying to his wife saying, yeah, I was producing lots and lots of oil, but getting nothing. So they did finally work out from scratch a method to convert the leaf of the white cypress and to extract the essential oil out of the white cypress. At the same time, Uncle Pete revealed to us that traditionally the white cypress leaf was heated and used to apply to skin for skin conditions, be it eczema, be it cuts, bruises, swellings, abrasions. So it was a traditional bush medicine. And so we sort of thought, well, we've got this beautiful oil, we know it's medicinal, or what can we do with it? So that's sort of where Native Secrets was sort of born from, taking this traditional knowledge and then applying it to the benefit of all peoples. So all Australians and all the world. So we started off, first we extracted the oil, then we've actually started our skincare range. So we have a natural skincare range of shampoos, lotions, potions, all that sort of stuff. But it all contains these native essential oils which have medicinal properties. So that's sort of where we started, which is quite a beautiful story in itself.
So, Brendan, I think we've actually got a picture of some of the products that have come from that, which is just coming. Oh, wow, that just looks amazing.
There you go. That's our body lotion.
Yep.
And
yep.
on the left, you can see some of the oils. So we have about 4 oils. So we have the wood of the white cypress is one oil. The leaf is a separate oil. They're quite distinct oils, separate oils. We also do Buddha wood, and we also do the lemon scented gum. So, and ironically, what we've actually found, a lady from the UK grabbed some of our oils, and she rubbed it on her horses. And apparently it was really good for horses too. So she actually wants to use some of our product for equine use. So we've got a whole side branch that we're about to explore. But I came across Phil and Cherie a couple of years ago when I was helping them with the Regional Innovations Fund, which was a university grant program around creating a sort of innovative scientific-based project with a business. And so with Native Secrets, we looked at, well, we've got this traditional science. How do we then incorporate modern science to actually improve our products and make it better? And what really stimulated us was Phil's, where he's from, he's a Bidjirakara man from central Queensland. And they use a lot of gumby, so which translate to medicinal plant, but they use gumby to treat everything. So he wanted to focus on that. And one of the interesting things with, Indigenous medicine is it's largely anecdotal. And even though there's been 65,000 years of human trials and evolution and research, we don't have anything written down. So if you go to the Cancer Council of Australia, there's actually a page on gumby. And what it says is this plant has all these wonderful properties, but there's no independent scientific proof. So we can't verify anything or use anything. And that was our sort of light bulb moment where we thought, okay, we need to apply some modern science with our traditional science and actually enhance what we already know. Before all this knowledge is lost. So like someone like an Uncle Pete, who's got this incredible knowledge and this incredible skill set, if we don't milk that knowledge now and utilize that knowledge now, it is at risk of losing. So it's really, really important we speak to the old people and the elders now and capture this knowledge. So what we actually looked at then was, okay, we've got one plant, but we know there's actually thousands of them. So where do we start? And so we chose one, which was gumby. we decided that we want to take it further and actually get some scientific proof. And we wanted to get independent quality scientific proof. So I knew about the CSIRO Kickstart program because I'd dealt with it through other sort of avenues. So we sort of really wanted to delve into Gumby, and we know Gumby doesn't actually extract an oil like the white cypress. So we did a bit of independent research, and we actually looked at the cannabis industry, which globally is huge. So it's worth billions and billions of dollars globally. And, cannabis has been used to treat all sorts of conditions. And it is a massive, massive industry. But of course, it's got lots of problems because it's associated with an illegal drug. And there's all the stigma of cannabis. So there's no reason that Australia doesn't have a native plant that can be just as good, if not better, than cannabis without the stigma. And it's a natural Australian product that is linked to Indigenous culture and heritage and all those wonderful stories. And there's no reason we can't create an Indigenous industry where all the benefits go back to the traditional knowledge holders. So that's when Native Secrets really started kicking into gear around what we were going to do. And our ultimate destiny is now we don't want to make soaps, we want to make medicines and treatments and those sorts of things. And it's a very long pathway and it's a very difficult pathway, but there is actually the TGA in Australia does have a Indigenous pathway. So, which was actually geared up for likes of the traditional Chinese medicines, even Indian medicines, but there hasn't been utilised for, as far as we're aware, for Australian Indigenous medicines. So we want to be on that journey and one of the first. So our first step was we sort of did our own research, very naively, probably. And we found from the cannabis industry that they are quite particular around their extraction methodology. So the actual, to take the goodness out of a plant requires a process, and that process in itself can be physically damaging to the plant. It may require heat, or it may require all sorts of other processes that can actually damage the goodies inside the plants that make it less bioactive. So our findings from the cannabis industry is they were employing a process, critical CO2 extraction was the latest and greatest. And it seemed to be less harmful, and it seemed to have better yields. So if we put our Gumby plant through it, we're likely to get a better yield and a more bioactive ingredient. So that was in our heads what we were going to do. So what we thought scientifically was, okay, this is what we're going to do. This is the process we're going to test it. We're going to extract using this, what actually proves to be a very, very, but we're going to extract all this good stuff and turn it into medicines. That was our thought process. And then we took the CSIRO and they taught us a lot better, basically. They showed us how simple we were and how much we should learn from the real scientists. And me, who studied science 20, 30 years ago, perhaps I don't know as much as I do. So we entered into what's called the Kickstart program with CSIRO, which is basically for startups or basically low value early stage companies. And they provide a supportive funding program with 2 goes at research up to $100,000 where they will pay half of that. So they'll pay $50,000 worth of research. And they pair you up with all sorts of weird and wonderful people from CSIRO, who you'll speak to next. Who have it's just been an absolutely brilliant experience, and we've learned so much out of the experience. And to be honest, CSIRO, they came out to our site, they sat down and spoke to us, they listened to our stories, they tried to understand the whole Indigenous and the cultural side of things. And they were also really strong on protecting our IP as well, which was, one of our nervous things because we want to protect the Indigenous IP. And I've got to take my hat off to CSIRO. They were absolutely fantastic in the way they approached us and Native Secrets as an Indigenous business. And they have an Indigenous onboarding team. So we've sort of worked with them for over 12 months now. We've done our first stage of research, and we're about to actually do our second stage of research. And I've met some very, very wonderful people, including Peter, who you'll speak to next. So yeah, it's been a wonderful experience. But so we've just on the start of the journey, but that's one plant. Every time I go out with Uncle Pete, he pulls up on the side of the road. He drags me across the road, pulls some random leaf off a tree and makes me eat it. And I'm sure he's just trying to torture me because some of them taste ghastly. But apparently he's not. Apparently they are actual proper medicines. So the one last week was emu bush, which he believes treats breast cancer. Today it was another weed which apparently treats STDs. So I'm not quite sure why he's trying to feed me it. I don't know if he's trying to tell me something, but every week, every time I talk to him, there's a new plant. So we've just got this whole library of different plants we want to test because there's a whole world. There's a massive big medicinal cabinet out there outside our door, which has been largely ignored. And we've got the potential to help millions of people globally using traditional knowledge and create a really cool, sustainable industry that employs, engages, and supports Indigenous peoples and groups throughout the country, because each different region has their own plants. So that's our vision for the company, is to take it to that level.
Thank you, Brendan, for sharing all of that. I loved hearing the backstory, and it brings a lot of memories, as I have this wonderful opportunity of working with some other elders where it's the same sort of passion that they have of their local bush foods and bush medicines. And I'm very excited to hear more from CSIRO's perspective, because I think it is something very special with what you have done together with Uncle Pete, Phil and Cherry and Brendan to have such a wonderful company in place. So Peter, would you now like to share CSIRO's role in all of this and maybe help answer some of those questions about techniques and things as well, where we heard a bit of a taster in there from Brendan. Thank you, Peter.
Thanks, Joanne, and thank you, Brendan, for that fantastic introduction. You've said a few things that I don't need to say now, which is excellent. So I'm joining you tonight from the lands of the Bunurong people. So I'd just like to extend my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Yes, so Brendan mentioned that we have this Kickstart program which assists Australian small businesses to develop new technologies that will help them to grow their businesses. And so it's not just for Indigenous companies, it's also for other non-Indigenous companies, but it's been particularly a valuable one in this case with this collaboration. And Brendan mentioned that Native Secrets came to us. They'd already selected a plant that they were particularly interested in, that they wanted to pursue, and it had been used for millennia from multiple different conditions and ailments. And so what we've done is worked with Native Secrets to try and take notice of how that plant was used by the Indigenous people, and then choose a particular ailment that it should be promising to treat. And then, as Brendan said, look at ways of extracting the goodies out of the plant, the beneficial components of the plant. And there are various different liquids you can use for that. But you can imagine the extraction process is a bit like the way you make a cup of tea or a cup of coffee. You've got your plant material, you've got a hot liquid, you soak the plant material, that's usually ground up plant material or fine leaves, and you soak that in that hot liquid, and then you filter off the plant material, and then you're left with what could be described as a tea. And that's where the goodies are. So in our case, we don't take that, we don't use that liquid as it is, we have to distill off the liquid. So Ian, do you mind showing that picture again, please? Yeah, excellent. So you see on the right-hand side there are 3 little bottles which show what you get once you've done that extraction process with a liquid and then distilled off the liquid to leave a residue behind. So the the two vials on the right, particularly the two on the right, you can see this oily sort of liquid at the bottom of the vial. So that's what's called a concentrated extract. So what the plan is to use those concentrated extracts and then formulate them into some sort of cream or ointment that will be useful for the treatment of certain skin conditions. And so we've focused on, as Brendan mentioned, conditions like eczema, because that's what the Indigenous people, that's the sort of thing that Indigenous people have used this plant for in the past. And then try to establish if these extracts have properties that should be useful for treating that condition. So looking for antibacterial, antifungal, and particularly anti-inflammatory properties. So inflammation is eczema is a type of an inflammatory disease. So if this extracts have potential to have anti-inflammatory properties, it could actually be possible to turn this into a medical product. So we've done these tests in the lab. We can't test these extracts straight on people. We need to develop tests within the lab to see if these things are likely to have these properties. So antibacterial and antifungal properties, see if these extracts will stop bacteria and fungi from growing. And also we do these tests on isolated cells that release little chemical signals that are an indication of an inflammatory response. And we check to see if these extracts will limit that inflammatory response. And so the results are very promising. But I should emphasize that how we chose to do those experiments was really by listening to what Native Secrets was telling us and how this plant was normally used. And so they told us about how they would prepare a tea for use on a skin condition. They would, what sort of skin conditions they would use. That helped us decide which technical experiments and which tests we should run. And so it's a continual exchange of knowledge and exchange of knowledge between the knowledge that's been developed by the Indigenous people for millennia and modern science, using and connecting the two to try and develop new and better products. And I think that's pretty much all I need to say now. So you can stop sharing that picture. Yeah.
Ben, fantastic. Thank you so much, Peter, and Brendan as well, for going through all of that. And I love the fact that you highlight it is actually the knowledge of the knowledge holders, so the custodians of those lands and their knowledge, that you're incorporating into finding the best ways of making the products. And customary knowledge is so important of our First Nations peoples. So I'm now going to segue into our lovely collaborators, Sarah and James from South Coast Seaweed. So we've just talked, of course, Native Secrets in terms of use of plants and knowledge from elders such as Uncle Pete, being so important to share for the next generation, for being able to develop products such as new medicines for benefit of all of us. And Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples have just this amazing knowledge of the unique biodiversity of the land, but also of the sea. And the sea includes seaweeds. And Australia actually has an abundance of unique species. So we're going to hear from Sarah and James Thomas, who have their own business focused on seaweed, South Coast Seaweed. So Sarah and James, we'll get you also to unmute. It's so lovely to have you joining us. Of course, you're joining us, and we'll just, you're joining us all the way from Yuin country on the New South Wales South Coast. And you set up together South Coast Seaweed fairly recently as a fully owned Indigenous company. And it's all focused on sustainable use of seaweeds. Similar to Native Secrets, you've been recognised for the amazing work that you do with a host of awards. So I'd love you to share about yourselves and what your company does. So now over to the two of you, Sarah and James. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne. I'm really excited to join you tonight and everybody. We'll just share the screen with the presentation.
Oh, good.
Sorry for the little bit of lag there.
Oh, great.
This is a beautiful picture of some different types of seaweed on Yuin country, and we've got a little bit of a presentation that we'd like to do. So I might just hand it over to James and we'll start from there.
Hi, Joanne. Hopefully you can hear me properly. My name is James Thomas. I'm from the Yuin country down here on the far south coast of New South Wales. We're living at Bateman's Bay at the moment, and yeah, I was saying we're from the Yuin country. It reaches from La Perouse in Sydney all the way down to the Victorian border. All the way out to the snowy mountains of Kosciuszko Mountains. My grandfather was a tribal elder of the Yuin down here on the south coast, Gubbo Ted Thomas, and he's a well-known person all over New South Wales, well known in Canberra and in Sydney. My nan, Ann Thomas, she was also a tribal elder from down on the south coast here, and they were both well known throughout the Yuin coast. And as for myself, me and my wife Sarah, we're both co-founders of South Coast Seaweed, a small business that focuses on revitalising traditional knowledge and practices to create sustainable products and sustainable products using seaweed. So thank you. I'd like to hand it to Sarah.
Thanks, James. I'm also the co-founder of South Coast Seaweed. We started our business 3 years ago, just after the Black Summer bushfires. We wanted to learn a little bit more about what had happened to the environment and the quality of the water and the different seaweeds after the bushfires. And we learned a lot about seagrass restoration in that period of time. That led to a fascination about seaweed and all the amazing things that it could do. And we started to think a little bit more about stories that our grandparents had taught us about using seaweed to fish and weave, and we wanted to delve a little bit deeper into that. So our culture is what guides us.
So growing up here along the south coast, you learn a lot about living with the sea and the land, and a lot of the fishing, diving, and living off the land, taking only what was needed, using early forms of cultivation, harvesting, fishing, and living off the land to have a sustainable lifestyle. This provides sustainable resources for all life on Earth. This is the way of both humans and animals alike. This is our strong spiritual connection to the land and the sea.
So did you know that seaweed provides 70% of the oxygen we breathe on Earth and is the fastest growing species in the world? It was traditionally used by saltwater Aboriginal communities across Australia in food, medicine, shelter, clothing, and cultivation. So what is seaweed? Seaweed is a type of marine algae that grows in marine or freshwater environments. It's a diverse group of species that can range in size, shape, and colour, and seaweed plays a crucial role in our marine environments. It also provides food and habitat for various marine species. These are categorised Seaweeds are categorised into three main groups. You've got reds, greens and browns, and seaweed has been used by humans for centuries, not only as a food source, but as in various industries such as agriculture, cosmetics, pharmaceuticals, and it's also known for its high nutrient content, including vitamins, minerals and antioxidants. The use of seaweed in Australia dates back thousands of years and has been an important part of both Indigenous and non-Indigenous cultures. For many Aboriginal groups along the coast, seaweed was not only an important source of nutrients, but also had significant cultural and spiritual connections. It was used in traditional medicines, as a natural dye for textiles, and was even woven into baskets and other objects like nets to catch fish. Then, with the arrival of European settlers in Australia, seaweed continued to be an important resource. In the mid-1800s, seaweed was collected to become a commercial enterprise as the growth of the kelp industry began to take hold. Kelp was harvested from shore and then processed into soda ash, which was then used for a variety of industrial purposes. Seaweed was also collected for fertilizers because it was rich in potassium and other minerals. However, as industrial processes changed and synthetic alternatives were developed, like plastics, the demand for seaweed diminished. And by the 20th century, the industry had all but disappeared. Today, seaweed is still widely used in Indigenous communities, and there has been a resurgence in interest in seaweed as a nutritional superfood and for its commercial benefits. It's being studied for its potential use right now in Australia, for its renewable sources for biofuels, animal feed, and other industrial applications. Some of the traditional Aboriginal uses for kelp included it was eaten fresh or dried, it was boiled or roasted. It was a very important food source for coastal Indigenous communities as it contained many nutrients such as iodine, protein, vitamins, and minerals. So if you were living in coastal communities and you weren't great at catching a fish, you were able to go collect, hunt, and gather forage for things like oysters and seaweed, and this would definitely keep your sustenance and nutrients up until the next day. Kelp was also used to treat a various of ailments such as coughs, colds, sore throats, and was also externally used for a poultice for skin ailments and wounds, such as oyster cuts. Seaweed has numerous commercial purposes beyond its culinary applications, and it is used in the production of all of the things that I mentioned earlier. And one of the things that we hope to do is create a marine innovation hub and processing facility down on the far south coast of New South Wales, where we can lead a First Nations-led social enterprise, creating jobs for our people along the south coast. We started this initiative to reconnect with our culture and create an industry on the south coast that was sustainable for the future of our marine life and for the next generation. Some of the highlights from our journey over the last few years has been being able to reconnect people with sea country and ocean foraging practices and revitalising that traditional knowledge around seaweed. A lot of the dance groups and elders are starting to use seaweed again in practices, and that's a really proud moment for us that we are able to capture and revitalise that traditional knowledge that we were losing on the far south coast. We were lucky enough to be a part of the Minderoo Foundation's Dream Venture Masterclass and also won Indigenous Business Month Small Regional Business of the Year and were finalists in the CommBank Young Hero Awards. We've also sold over 3,000 products and have just recently published our first colouring book. It's been a really interesting journey. Seaweed is fascinating. It's 650 million years old, and for me, the journey and that connection to sea country started with seaweed. All life on Earth started with these tiny little microorganisms in the sea that evolved and changed life and turned everything that you see in the ocean into plants on the land. It's just a really amazing species.
Thank you. Thank you. That was so wonderful. And what comes across so much is the absolute passion you have for what you do, for connecting with culture, for being able to develop products that are environmentally sustainable. And also, I know that you have a real passion for educating youth as well. And so I've been very fortunate to be able to work with the two of you, where you have been able to educate school students and even university students as part of our Indigenous Connected curriculum to let people see how important these knowledge systems are. And you made a comment about plastics as well. So seaweeds, how do they fit into plastics and ways to help address the plastic issue?
Definitely. So seaweeds are being researched at the moment as plastic replacements. So you're able to use that and mold it down into things where you could create a plastic chair for a school or plastic packaging for different cosmetics. It's really fascinating, these little pellets of seaweed. So you process the seaweed down and create these little pellets that then can be used as similar to synthetics.
And obviously having, sorry, go ahead.
Native Secrets are now looking at using seaweed to produce our bottles.
Okay.
That's beautiful. That's awesome, Brendan.
Yep. Yep. We're just starting the journey, but we're very excited about the opportunity there.
Fantastic. Look, there's just so many things. I mean, because we're always thinking about the amazing diversity we have in plants, but to also hear what is available with seaweeds. And of course, seaweeds are not plants, are they?
No, so seaweeds are macro and microalgae. So the macroalgae are what you see down on the beach when you go for a little bit of a walk along the beach, and the microalgae are those microscopic organisms that I mentioned before that evolved and created all these beautiful different underwater forests and everything we see on land as well.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Sarah and James, for sharing. I want to remind the listeners that we will be going into Q&A soon. And so please put any questions that you have into the Q&A section of the Zoom site, and we will get to answer as many as we can. Now, I'm sure that, in our audience, there'll be people thinking, I want to know more about what Native Secrets does, what South Coast Seaweed does, whether they can learn from resources that you have, perhaps use it in teaching or come to workshops and so on. So I believe we have a slide that shows everyone where you can get more information on the website of both Native Secrets and South Coast Seaweed. Fantastic. I'll leave that up as we also ask. So Sarah and James and also Brendan, whether there's more that you want to share if people really want to know about what you do. So for example, Sarah and James, I've had the pleasure of going to one of your first workshops. And so would you like to share a little bit more about the workshop opportunities?
Thanks, Joanne. So we hold a range of different ocean foraging workshops, connecting people to sea country and teaching people about the different types of seaweed and their traditional uses along the far south coast. We've got a Redzi account, so you can book those privately as private experiences, school groups, corporate. And we also host a range of different tours in collaboration with the local council as well, free community experiences. We've just done a series called Reconnecting to Eurobodalla and Sea Country. They were really beautiful, and we're really excited to head up to Sydney to meet you at Redfern over the weekend.
Excellent. Thank you for that plug as well. Yeah, look, I just found when we went to this all-day workshop with you, it was just the most wonderful experience and so much that we learned. I suppose I just thought seaweed, there were so few types, and I just didn't know the diversity, and they're just so different in many ways. So I think, James, I remember you sharing that you can also have seaweed that tastes like chili, for example, and you've got the bacon of the sea as well. There's so many different types of seaweeds. So we've got some questions that we're going to ask soon as well. And so, Brendan, is there anything, are there any sort of other aspects of resources that Native Secrets have available if people were interested? A little bit quiet there, that's okay. So as I said, everyone, you can access lots of information. There's wonderful videos, wonderful resources on these websites. And what I'd now like to do is actually start to ask some questions of our presenters. And so we're also going to get Peter popped on the spotlight as well, and Brendan will shout out if he has any answers to any questions too. And in fact, Brendan, there's a question for you. And this, I think, may also, Peter may also have some responses as well. So is Native Secrets looking at developing disinfectants, for example, for hospitals, school and animal enclosures with the oils, particularly after you noted what the oil could be used for?
Sorry, Joanne, I just cut out for a minute. Sorry,
yeah, that's okay. I will say so again. So are Native Secrets looking at developing disinfectants, for example, for hospitals, schools, animal enclosures with the oils?
We actually did a disinfectant range during COVID. So, but just like everyone else did, but that was basically a pure product. It wasn't based on any traditional knowledge. So, one of the aspects we have tested is antimicrobial. So of the aspects we had tested through CSRO, there were cytotoxicity, antimicrobial, anti-inflammatory, and what was the fourth one, Peter? There was another one. Oh, antioxidant, which was done through Charles Sturt University. At the moment, we haven't found an antimicrobial one, but we've only tested one plant. So at some stage, maybe. At this stage, no, we haven't actually got a plant-based antimicrobial.
And of course, that would be very exciting.
Can I jump in there, Brendan?
Yeah.
So your white cypress product must
Yes,
have
please.
antimicrobial properties.
And so you've got antimicrobial properties with the white cypress. And actually, that was a really interesting plant because, Brendan, you mentioned its environmental significance, and you often hear the term like circular economy stated. How does that connect with white cypress? Can you elaborate on that?
Okay. Well, for us, what we actually do is when we remove the white cypress, we actually restore the natural habitat, because sitting dormant in the ground is all the native grass seeds, the eucalypts, the wattles, and we've got a patch where it's got the tree and the post. So we've got with all the white cypress, and we've got the side where we've cleared it. And within a couple of years, the eucalypts are shooting through, and the wattle is shooting out. We've got the ants back. We've got the kittens back. We've got the kangaroos coming back. So we've really restored the habitat there. And so the plant and animal life that's coming back into that land, it's very, very abundant. So we're actually improving that land.
That's fantastic. And so you've got such multi-purposes with these. And it's and obviously when we look,
remove is once correct.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, sorry. With the byproduct being the mulch, we can either put that back in the ground, but the next stage is we actually want to convert it to biochar, which is basically the carbon-rich ingredients, and we can actually put that back in soil as a carbon crack. And so we can dig in carbon back into the soil, which helps water retention, improve the soils, and you can actually get carbon credits for that. So if you measure the soil before and after we put the carbon in, you can actually increase your carbon capture and actually get a carbon credit. So it can add value to the land.
Fantastic. So it really is that whole circular process there. Thank you so much. We have now some seaweed questions.
Not just capturing carbon, so it's completely. We also use steam to.
What's that, sorry?
Sorry, I was just going to say we've partnered with a local abattoir who produce steam. So we use their energy, their waste energy, for all our manufacturing process. So we have no carbon footprint. We only actually increase the carbon capture in the soil that we treat. So we're carbon positive.
Wow, that is amazing. Thank you. And sorry for having interrupted you. That was fantastic to hear all of that. Sarah and James, how are the high current commercial demands for the various types of seaweeds that you go? So what is the current demand of seaweed products? And are you able to keep up with demand?
Currently, we keep selling out of product. It's an unfortunate problem to have, good and bad. Seaweed is, we need to be able to scale up. So we need a little bit of a larger commercial facility to scale up and build our capacity to be able to produce more products. We do have an opportunity to have some quite large contracts, but currently, because it's only just the two of us in our small business, we're just taking it one step at a time and just sort of bootstrapping it. I noticed there was another question about government subsidies. There is some current resources that are being developed around how to have a seaweed farm in Australia, or what the strategies are around that sort of stuff. It'll be interesting to see how that comes together over the next 12 months.
Fantastic. Thank you. Are there any adverse impacts on seaweed species? So I'm looking at, are there any adverse impacts on endemic seaweed species by the introduction of other types of seaweed species that aren't natural to the area that you know of?
Definitely. So the Calipra taxifolia is an endemic and very invasive species that was causing some trouble down on the south coast probably around 5 years ago. It is noted that if you see it, that it needs to be reported and removed from the area by DPI pretty much straight away. But the interesting thing about that is the Calipra cactoids are actually the sea grapes, which is the nutrient, like a traditional food. They look slightly different, but very much same colors, same family, same genome. So, yeah.
Okay. Thank you. You made a comment that you can use seaweeds in various ways of moulding them and so on. Can they be used to make clothes, and how?
There is an amazing company over in the UK at the moment that are creating lingerie out of seaweed. Absolutely love their brand, Alexandria. But yes, seaweed can be used to create clothing. There are companies that are looking at doing that in Australia, swimwear, shirts, textiles. The options are endless.
Okay, fantastic. Actually, we've heard a little bit about, so this is coming back to Peter and Brendan. We've heard a little bit about sort of antimicrobial, antioxidant, anti-inflammatory. Why are we interested in that sort of combination? Peter, is that something you can answer, because you're the one doing CSIRO, doing some of that testing. So why that mix?
So the issue, what can happen with conditions like eczema, which is an inflammatory condition of the skin gets damaged, and then there's little cracks and so on in the skin where bacteria and fungi can infest it. And so the condition becomes a combination of a eczema and a skin infection. And so that's why we were interested in looking to see if the Gumby extracts were both antimicrobial, so antibacterial, antifungal, and also anti-inflammatory at the same time, because if you can develop a product that would treat both of those aspects of the condition, then healing should occur much more quickly.
Thank you, Peter. Okay, I've got just a few more questions that I'm going to have a look at here. So, Sarah and James, are there any types of seaweeds that we can grow from Sydney to the central coast of New South Wales? So, sort of the common seaweeds that we can grow around that region that you're familiar with?
Yeah, definitely. There's quite a few common species. Kelp, crayweed, the Calipra cactoid, so the sea grapes, sargassum's another really common species, as well as the Neptune's necklace. They're commonly found all across the east coast of Australia.
Thank you. So I'm seeing, I think we've got, okay, somebody's asked, coming back to Peter and Brendan, what about antivirals? Is that something that can be looked at of interest?
Well, antivirals are certainly of interest, but a particular plant that Native Secrets asked us to look at, I don't think was, well, actually, yeah, it has, jump in, Brendan, if I say anything that's incorrect, but Indigenous people have used Gumby for sore throats and that sort of thing as well. But that's an internally taken medicine. That's a bit more complicated than just simply putting on the skin, because you have to be super careful that it's not going to cause toxicity issues. Are there any toxic properties in the extracts that if you take them orally are going to cause trouble? So, and getting these things approved for clinical use, there are a lot more hurdles to get through than a skin treatment, initial topical skin treatment. So together we decided to go for the simplest thing first, the thing that's most likely to be approved first. And then, of course, Native Secrets is very keen to look at those other type conditions like antiviral treatments later on.
Okay, fantastic. We've only got a couple of minutes left. So Sarah and James, you noted that you've written a book and just been asked, is it for adults or children or both? Oops, you're on mute.
Thanks, Joanne. Whoops. We've got a colouring book, which is for kids, which is 34 pages, but we're also getting ready to launch our sea country foraging book and ocean foraging on saltwater country. So that should be available in the next couple of months.
Okay, fantastic. Now we have almost run out of time, so we are going to just do a little bit of wrapping up of everything here. And I know one of you have asked, well, what's this Redfern event all about? So we will let you know in a second as well. So I would like to give a huge thank you to Sarah and James, Peter, Brendan, and also through the video, Phil and Uncle Pete for presenting. It's just been fantastic hearing from all of you and really getting to understand more about customary knowledge from the land and the sea. For the audience, I hope that you very much enjoyed this session, which is our first session for the Indigenous Science Experience. We have face-to-face and online events. And we're just going to put up a little slide here, because you might even want to join us at some of our other sessions. So this week, we also run another webinar tomorrow evening, Microscopy and Art, We Are Country and We Are Culture. And we also run the Indigenous Science Experience at Redfern Community Centre Community Day. So if you're in Sydney or near Sydney, we very much encourage you to come along for this very special day where we will have a number of First Nations scientists and technologists, including Sarah and James, and also the wonderful Yagal elders that I've worked with, amongst many others. So you can find out more about all the sessions that we have at our NISEP website, particularly going into the Indigenous Science Experience component of it. Before I end the session, I would like to ask our audience members to fill out an evaluation survey that will be emailed to you, but I think we might even be able to send it in the chat in the next minute or so. So our tech-savvy person behind the scenes, which is also my husband, will send this to you hopefully through the chat. And I wanted to also just remind you that, of course, it is National Science Week, and there are such amazing things to do. I encourage you to get involved in as many things as possible, both online and face-to-face. There's so many events across the entire country. It's just wonderful. And we are very fortunate with the Indigenous Science Experience program that we're running across this week to have been supported through a National Science Week grant. So this is an Inspiring Australia initiative that's supported by the Australian government as part of National Science Week. And we're very fortunate to have that opportunity. So lastly, thank you to all of our audience members. We hope you've had a great night, and we hope that you have a great National Science Week. Thank you, everyone.